Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen. Thank you so much for joining me. And as I said, I'm very impressed for those in the UK turning up today. So what I'm going to talk about today is the PRINCE2 framework. So the PRINCE2 framework was developed by the UK government. I think it was around the 1980s, and over 1 million people are now accredited with PRINCE2 practitioner status. And the idea behind this framework was that the government wanted to stop wasting public money on large projects. So that's where it comes from. It stands for Projects in Controlled Environments. 2 is just the version that it was. And in the UK, on average, project managers earn approximately £50,000 a year on a permanent salary. If you go into contracting or consulting and you live in a large city like London, then you can generate incomes well above 100,000 as an experienced project manager. So if it's something that you're interested in, or it's something that you already do and you're curious to evolve more, there's definitely a big need out there, because a lot of large organizations are managing huge budgets and huge projects. So the more people that can get skilled up in this area, the better. And I do somewhat feel that it's going to be somewhat AI proof. Yes, so who am I basically? My name's Anna Bromley. I've been running complex programs and projects now for the last 10 years. I've managed cross-functional teams across lots of different geographies, like India currently and Brazil. And I enjoy doing that. So I'm from Paddington in London, and me and my husband, we enjoyed spontaneous trips away, like I am in Malaga at the moment. So but it's a pleasure to be here just for this short period and taking you through this. So without further ado, let me just get started. So this is where I'm going to be spending most of the time, is just talking through the PRINCE2 process model. So I did my accreditation, I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago now. So this is directly taken from the sorry, I'm going to have to keep letting people in. The Axelos, I think it's Axelos accreditation, and I've simplified it because from my experience, I'm just pulling out the key bits of information that you need to know. So if you do the proper formal accreditation, you'll know that it takes 5 days. I did it in person. It was like £1,000 at the time, and I think it's gone up since then. So it's incredibly expensive. But basically, I've got an online course, and I've distilled all the best bits into an hour. And so in this knowledge sharing session, I'm going to share even more of the best bits, just so that you can get a flavour of what it is. So in terms of the project mandate, that's basically just the trigger or the idea. And there's 3 different layers in this framework: direction, management and delivery. And so that usually comes from an exec sponsor, and we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. The project brief here is a little bit more detailed, and it just builds some context around the initial idea fundamentally. The project initiation document is like the master project agreement. It's a formal document. It can sometimes actually be a contract if you're using a service provider to deliver. And then once you get into execution, so that's like we've done pre-project and initiation with that sort of setup documentation. Once you get into execution, then you're probably all familiar with some key project documents like the project plan, risks, actions, issues and dependencies, which is often called the RAID log, status reports, which is really important for reporting to whoever your sponsors are on your project, and then moving into closure, which is the end closure report. So the reason that most of this is along the middle layer here is because that's what the project manager is actually responsible for. So if your role is in project management, then you'll live a lot of the time in that layer of the organization where you are communicating with the team that's actually doing the delivery, and also communicating upwards to senior management who are authorizing and approving different phases of a project. And so these dotted lines here, they're often called stage gates, and that's why it's projects in controlled environments, because you're just trying to phase things out in the most appropriate way. I forgot to mention, and this is going to be a bit more of a lecture style session because of the limited time. But if you do have questions, please pop them in the chat and I'll leave a couple of minutes at the end to answer them. So let's jump in then to the project mandate. I've just got this. I am going to share the slides after the session as well, and also a couple of templates for the plan and the RAID log that I'm going to be showing as well. So I've just put this down as, what is a project mandate? Like, I haven't got hours and hours to explain it here. I've got like a minute or two. And so fundamentally, it's an idea at a glance that's had some thinking behind what you actually want to do. So from my experience, project mandates don't generally tend to be as structured as what I'm showing you on screen here. But if you are to find that you've got a project mandate in some way from a senior sponsor, I would encourage you to try and get as much of this information out of them as possible. So for example, where's the background and the context for this idea come from? Have you got some key objectives so that it can be clearly measured? Can you detail more about what the scope is, like what's in scope, out of scope, what the boundaries are for, what idea actually entails and doesn't entail, who's going to be key people in the organization that you're going to need to interact with, any sort of early indications. It doesn't need to be like a formal business case or anything at this stage, but any early indication as to the justification for why this idea is a good idea is very helpful. And then an understanding from your sponsor about any constraints or assumptions that they might be making. And then also it's good to get down up front, like who is the authority behind this, like who's holding the purse strings, who's really responsible, and getting some clarity. So in a nutshell, if you can get that level of information at the start, you're going to be in really good stead going down the line. Too often I see that, for example, I'll come into a project, it's already in flight, and yet all the fundamentals are not in place. So the scope's unclear, stakeholders are unclear or unaligned. There's no contextual information to indicate where this project came from. So, do yourselves a favour and everyone else a favour and try and get as much of this information down as possible. So that's the project mandate. So we're still in, if I go back to here, we're still in that pre-project phase. So we may not have actually even kicked off a project at this point, right? So when we get to the project brief, we're kind of inching closer to initiation and to eventual execution. So all the project brief is just, as I mentioned when I was talking about the framework, just it's just a build of the mandate. So as I mentioned, once you've got the context and the objectives, now you're really, as the project manager, going to need to start thinking about how am I going to structure my team? Who is my team going to be? What is the breakdown of the work? Like, how can I phase this or chunk this in an appropriate way? What's my project plan going to look like? So an early formulation of a project plan. What are my tolerances? So in project management, generally you've got the triple constraint, which is like scope, cost, quality, and time. And if you move one of those levers, then you change another. So if you want really high quality output, you're going to need to spend more time and more money on it, for example. So you need to understand from your stakeholders at this point, like if you see yourself going over 5-10%, do you need to raise the flag with your stakeholders, or can you just let it slide until it reaches that tolerance? So that's what that's all about. In the briefing stage as well, you should also be getting an early idea of what your risks and issues are. So that's why I'm going to talk about the RAID log. So starting to document them. This is an activity that you do by yourself. Often stakeholders will flag concerns or potential challenges, and it's your job as the project manager to sort of like hoover all of those up and then make sure they're logged centrally. And often under underutilized area is stakeholder analysis. So often on projects, because they're just formed of people fundamentally, your stakeholders are, they can make or break a project. So not understanding what drives them, what moves them, what's their personalities like, and how you should approach them and engage them is a recipe for disaster. And then also team meetings. So what kind of structure are you going to have in place? Like, do you want to have some daily touch points? Do you want to meet with your team a couple of times a week? Do you need to do different things for different levels of stakeholders? Getting that structure down, it's often called governance early, and getting people on board with it is how you'll get success, basically. And then the project approach as well. So like, what's the delivery methodology that you're going to run here? So there's many options of doing this, but are you going to do a defined discovery up front and then implement in a more iterative, or otherwise known as agile, approach? Are you going to run sprints, in which case you're going to be using the Scrum methodology? Are you going to do something a little bit more waterfall? So all of that needs to be defined in the project briefing stage of your project. So we've just done the mandate, and now we've got the project brief. So everything's shaping up nicely. Now we can move into our project initiation document. So this is otherwise known as the PID, or the more formal document, basically. So all I've tried to represent here is that it's just a build of the mandate, and then the project brief, and then all that we're adding here, quite significantly, is probably a detailed business case and then a high level solution flow. So let me just explain this a little bit better. What usually happens in practice is that the mandate, the brief, and the initiation document, they're not always like these separate, distinct things. Not everyone has this theory and knowledge about how projects need to run. So what you tend to find in practice is that these terms get conflated, these documents get mixed up. And so I personally don't obsess about, the rigid rules of how things need to be done. As long as the actual concepts are somewhere, then that's the most important thing to take forward, I would say, from this. But basically, once you've got all of this information laid in terms of your foundations, you really need to drill down further if you're going to create, a more formal project initiation document into the business case. So that aspect is very, very important. And all that means, quite simply, is that you thought about what the project is actually going to cost and what the potential benefits are from delivering this project. And so if you've then got this is a very simple example I've got here, but then if you've then got a clear idea of, what your resources and materials are, and then a total of that, and then what your benefits are likely to be, then you can work out what the net benefit is of actually delivering this project. So building out benefits and a business case is quite a complicated part of the project initiation document. I'm not covering it in any depth here, but if you're interested in that, do reach out to me, and maybe I'll try and put something together or share some additional resources for that. It gets complicated because not all benefits are can be associated with a cost. You can try and do analysis and cost out benefits in that way, so that you can get this nice net benefit in terms of money, but it's not simple and it does trip people up. But anyway, for a solid project initiation document, the point is you need a really strong business case, and that's usually a bit of a financial analysis of the costs and the benefits. Then on top of that, so we've got all of the foundations down here. On top of that, you would generally have some sort of high level visual. So as people say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I've got a very, very simple example here just to show you. So in this particular example, this might be some sort of, sales and marketing project. The company wants to move from identifying contacts on LinkedIn and putting them into Excel to, in the target state, still identifying contacts on LinkedIn, but putting them into HubSpot, which is a CRM system instead. So, I mean, this is, as I said, very simple idea here, but the point is you really do need to start thinking about models and visuals for what your project is trying to achieve at this point in a project, because it's going to be a lot easier to communicate a picture to your stakeholders than, you know, a 10,000 page document. So anyway, that is the project initiation document in a nutshell. Now, I'm going to move on to the project plan. So we are fully in execution at the moment. So if I go back up here, we've already gotten to the execution phase. So I've got this plan here. I'm just going to flip my screen to this template here because it's just a screenshot. And this is the template that I'm going to share with everyone after the session. So just some fundamental ideas here. I love templates because they just make you accelerate faster, and you don't need to spend loads of money on fancy tools like Microsoft Project and, you know, Jira and things like that. Although, you know, that is great. Like, it is really good to use tools, don't get me wrong. But sometimes a simple plan like this can be just as effective. So what we've got here is options in terms of how you want to display your Gantt chart. So for example, you might want to bring it into monthly instead of weekly. We've got 2 key phases. So I've put some actual detail in here so that you can get some context. So this is a customer service portal plan. This is a made up project, but I've got 2 phases here, the scope and design phase and then the MVP phase, or the minimum viable product. Product and project sound so similar. I always get it confused. Minimum viable product phase as well. Some other key components of this plan, which I really like, is it breaks down plan start and also actual start and end dates. So as a project manager, one of your key sort of roles is to be able to track any slippage that happens in your project. So one of the easiest ways to do that is just to get start dates out of your team and then to actually track when you actually started, because that's, you know, a good prediction of when, you know, when things are actually going to end. So all this is doing here in the phase is just rolling up the total days from the whole phase overall, and it's just summing that up there. And then we've got our start and end dates. So these are just laid out in grey here. So if nothing's actually started yet, it's laid out in grey. If you've actually started this piece of work and finished it and you're on track, then in this particular example, it's just laying it out in the sort of purple colour. But if there has been any slippage or it's starting late, it gets indicated with the blue here. So it's a really nice visual for what's on track, what's behind. Another key concept here is the idea of dependencies as well. So really simply in this Excel template, you can just put the cell and then +1 day for if it's going to start after a previous task has actually finished, as is the instance in this case. So that's another key thing there. WBS just stands for the work breakdown structure. So that's basically just what are your key phases and then what are your key activities within those phases, and then putting them in some sort of logical sequence as well. So that's the project plan in a nutshell, and there's some help text over here as well. So there's some key useful things here, and so if they're helpful for you, then do feel free to use them. But moving on then, so keeping with the theme of execution, as I mentioned, you're going to want to log down your risks, your assumptions, your issues, and your dependencies. I've shaped up this nice template here, and we've also got a dashboard as well, which is really useful. So let me just flip into that now. And again, I've got some examples here. So I'm following the example from earlier with the customer service portal. So I've got five items here that are in my RAID log. These are made up, but just to give you some context, delays, you know, some assumptions, some issues and things like that. It's really important that you give an impact. So a lot of people in the sort of steering part or layer of the framework, you know, won't have the context that you do. So unless you spell out what the actual impact is, they might not get it as much. And then ownership is very important. And then basically assigning some sort of priority to it, you know, whatever it might be. Risk priority number, it just gives you an indication of like what is most critical, basically, and then a status there. And then all of this then just pulls into a nice little dashboard here, whereby you can see you've got a couple of critical issues, a couple of high issues, one moderate, and then none that are low and negligible. So you've got a total of 5. And this should be created at the start, as I mentioned, when you're in that early sort of pre-project initiation phase. And then it should be revisited on a frequent basis. And it should actually end up in your status reports as well. So that's the RAID log. Let me just put myself back in slideshow here. So now we're on to the project status report, and I can't stress enough how key this type of document is. So the different components of this are at the top. We've just got a ribbon here which just explains some of the key details. So when the project's targeting to complete, when its projection completion date, roughly how big it is, what stage is it in, is it an early project, is it actually in execution. Then I've got the actual project title and a little description of the project, so people reading this who don't know anything about it can actually see. I've got a little icon that should be relevant if possible. I've got some description, so I've again written an example of what we did in this period. This could be the last week, this could be the last 2 weeks. It depends what the cadence is, what we're planning to do in our team in the next period, and then what help is needed. And so that you can really clearly communicate to your senior stakeholders what you're actually looking for out of the conversation that you've set up. On the right hand side here, I've got a couple of things. I've got just a quick status. So we use our red, amber, green RAG status for what it is this period and what it was last period. So you can actually start to get an idea of what the trend is. So it's trending down really at the moment. So it really does need careful watching. And then also I find it's useful to give some indication as to where your problems lie. So breaking that down further in terms of, you know, is your plan the problem? Is it your resources that you're having challenges with? Is it your scope? Have you got too many risks and issues? Is the business case or the value of your project potentially compromised? Or do you have a problem somewhere with your budget? So not everyone breaks it down to that degree, but I personally find it helpful if you have that insight across every single area. But it really all boils down to your RAID log, really, because, you know, all these different items, if they're red, amber or green, they should really live in your RAID log. So that's your sort of like quick glance overall project status. Then you've got your plan. So putting some sort of small simplified screenshot as to what it is you're actually delivering, and maybe some indication of status as well. Something simple here is best. Just so at a glance you can see what your key milestones are. And then all I've got here is a couple of key risks or issues that I want to talk about at a senior level. So this would generally be reported on at a weekly or, you know, a monthly governance session. And so it's good just to really highlight the absolute key points to maximize the time that you have with your senior stakeholders who are inevitably busy and often running, you know, many projects at the same time. So we are whizzing through to the end now, and this is in a similar format to the project brief that I showed you at the start. And this is, you know, a nice glance on a page of our project. So imagine we've done our customer portal project. We're having a team meeting at the end and we're assessing, you know, how did our project perform? Like, was it on time? Was it on budget? You know, like did everyone have a mental breakdown at the end of it? What were our outcomes? Like what benefits were actually realized? Maybe what weren't, things like that. What lessons did we learn? Like what went well, what could be improved? Organizational knowledge is so important because especially in government, you don't want to keep making the same mistakes again. So it's really important that these are documented and taken forward next time. Anything that's outstanding, obviously, that needs to be resolved. So projects don't often just finish that cleanly. Sometimes there's a bit of a long tail or things that need to be taken into a more BAU or business as usual phase. And then any follow-on actions that you discovered. And often as a project manager, because you're moving on to new implementations and new challenges, you're often having to hand this over to someone else within the business. So doing that in a formal way is going to be very helpful. And if you've done all the steps at the start, then you'll be in really good shape. And if you haven't, then it's going to be a nightmare. And then finally, getting some level of approval from your key sponsorships that, you know, you've done a good job, you can move on, and everything's closed out and documented nicely. So that brings us to the end. I'm just kept checking my watch. So I think we've got a couple of minutes. Just wanted to say that if you enjoyed this, I've got lots of courses on my website that you can go and have a look at. I've distilled like thousands of pounds worth of accredited information into really short, simple, easy to gauge courses. And so this was really a flavour of some of the other courses I've got available.